Thank you, Sue, and welcome everyone to Mental Health Literacy for Coaches, our webinar on the time is now for this topic. My name, as Sue said, is Jeffrey Hull. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Coaching, and I am super excited to have this very special opportunity to announce the new course that we will be offering starting November 15th through the Institute of Coaching, and also have a really deep discussion with three thought leaders that are dear friends and experts in this space that are actively involved in the Institute of Coaching, and also part and parcel of the development of this wonderful new course that I hope many of you, if not all of you, will participate in over time. So take a minute and say hello in the chat box. We always like to see where folks are coming from. We often have people from all over the world joining us. So I would love to see where you're from. And we might also want to see what kinds of coaches we have today. So if you're a leadership coach or a wellness coach, just share with us maybe one word. What is your specialty area? Because we're interested in seeing what domains of coaching are really interested in this particular topic. And I just want to take a minute before we get started to give you a couple of details that I will also remind you toward the end. But part of the reason we wanted to do this webinar at this time is that, as you all know, World Mental Health Day was about, I think, 10 days ago. It is certainly a topic that is incredibly relevant to people all around the world coming out of the pandemic. And obviously in our workplaces, health, physical health, emotional health, and mental health are becoming really key when you read about quiet quitting and burnout and all of these issues around the lack of engagement and some of the challenges that people are finding in the workplace. So we at the Institute have been talking about doing a course like this for a long time, and we're super excited that we are completing this asynchronous 6-module course that will be available for registration and download in the middle of November. And for those of you that go to our website, instituteofcoaching.org, and sign up now, you'll be on our mailing list to get a early bird pricing, $100 off of the course. So please take advantage of that. And we are super excited today to have the person that actually is the key facilitator and helped with us of the design of the course. So let me just jump into telling you who our special guests are this morning or this afternoon or this evening from wherever you are. We're really privileged to have, as I said, Dr. Shelley Carson with us today. She is a researcher in brain science and instructor at Harvard University and an expert on topics of psychopathology, creativity, and resilience for over 20 years. She's the Director of Education and Research at the Academy for Brain Health and Performance and has written a number of bestsellers related to mental health and creativity. Dr. Carson is not only one of the key thought leaders that we partnered with on this course, she is the key teacher and facilitator throughout the course. So it's great that we have her here today. And also with us is my colleague and dear friend, Susan David. Dr. David is the co-founder and co-director of the Institute of Coaching. And she's an internationally recognized thought leader operating at the nexus of business and psychology. Many of you will know her amazing best-selling book, Emotional Agility. She's also been one of the key sponsors of this course that we've developed for you. So we're happy to have Susan with us today. And finally, we have Dr. Pamela Larde, who is a new member of our team and the leadership team at the Institute of Coaching, but fast becoming very well known to our members and incredibly interesting and thought-provoking leader in the coaching space. She's a professor of coaching psychology. She's an executive coach and author. She owns her own business coaching academy called the Academy of Creative Coaching, which, by the way, is the first Black female-owned ICF-approved coaching school in the world. So we are thrilled to have all three of you here with us today. And I want to start with just kind of a general question, because I think everyone recognizes that mental health is something that is important for thriving, for workplace performance, but it's become a particularly important issue for coaches to hone in on, because we're seeing with our clients and with the organizations we work where challenges are bubbling to the surface, as I mentioned earlier. So I want to get each of your perspectives to start with on why this topic and why now? Why do you think it's so important for us to be bringing literacy in mental health to our coaches? Susan, do you want to get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So as you mentioned, the focus on mental health has actually been historically germane to the existence of humanity. So since the beginning of time, we've been dealing with issues around mental health and well-being. And I actually think it's one of the great tragedies of our time that we're only having this conversation now, that it took a pandemic to bring this to the fore. Because for many, many decades, we have been seeing an increase in issues around mental health and well-being. Even pre-pandemic, the World Health Organization described that depression by 2030 was going to be the single leading cause of disability globally, outstripping cancer, outstripping heart disease. So these issues now are at the fore, and we know that the pandemic has in many ways brought them here. But this is crucial because how people feel impacts everything. How people feel impacts how they love, their relationships, how they live, how they parent, and how they lead. And so it seems like for coaching, there is both the direct impact that we have, where we might be working with someone who's struggling with issues around mental health and well-being. And even though as coaches, we aren't directly treating those issues impact on how people are able to move towards their goals, their purpose, how they come to their relationships, and in fact, how they interface with their lives in a very broad sense. And then as a coach, even if you aren't working with a client who directly is navigating a mental health issue, very often a family member of the client will be. And also as coaches, we are instrumental in shaping the conversations that are happening in our organizations and in our communities. So it is dependent on us and crucial for us when we have a conversation with a leader, for example, who's thinking about issues of flexibility, to be able to recognize that the decisions that that leader makes is going to impact on many, many people's well-being. And so there is both this direct influence that we can have with our clients, people who are navigating these issues, but recognizing that mental health and well-being are central to every decision that is made systemically within our organizations and beyond. And so it is crucial that this conversation become front and center.
Totally agree, which is why I had to have the time is now in the title.
The time is now. It's
time
late
is now.
and
It's too late.
It's urgent.
So Shelley, thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with Susan that mental health is affecting all of us one way or another. It's a growing crisis, not just in the United States, but around the world. And post-COVID, we've seen a real genuine increase in mental health problems. It's my hope that this increase in what we're seeing due to COVID is a temporary phenomenon and that rates will return to normal. However, even before COVID, research suggested that approximately 30% of all coaching clients may have mental health issues, wow, which means that coaches will encounter mental health problems in a substantial portion of clients. And in fact, the research also suggests that in the United States in particular, almost 50% of us will experience a diagnosable mental health disorder at some point during our life.
Right.
So research indicates not only the growing concerns about mental health, but that most coaches are often not generally aware of signs and symptoms of mental health issues. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's important that we bring up this topic now, because coaches are actually expected by the Coaching Code of Ethics to refer clients to mental health professionals when they exhibit symptoms. But if you're not totally aware of what the symptoms are, that's pretty hard to do.
Absolutely.
I can personally say that when I began my journey of research and work in the field of mental health, it opened my mind to so much about human nature in general. That's another reason that I think we need to be looking at this and things that I totally hadn't understood before. And I'm not saying that I or anybody else in the field fully understands the nature of mental illness now, but it truly is eye-opening to learn about the ways that we as humans vary in our mental and emotional lives. And it's very helpful for anyone, including coaches, whose goal is to help others flourish in their highest capacity to understand this topic.
Absolutely. Totally right on. Pam.
Yeah, and I think that the key issue is the fact that we have just all experienced probably one of the most traumatic eras that we probably have witnessed in our lifetimes with the pandemic and the impact that it had. We have people who witnessed multiple family members, pass away, suffer, and couldn't be there to support their families during this time. We have people who've been displaced from work. We have heightened and here in the United States, particularly racial tension that is really exacerbated by this idea that we have, on one hand, we need to be there for people of color and support them and create policies and so forth. And on the other hand, we're not talking about things like critical race theory, and we're going to ban certain books. And the consequence of this is that people are mentally exhausted. They're experiencing what is called weathering. And so, and this is a huge weight on the shoulders right now for not only people of color, but people who are also allies and accomplices with people of color in terms of some of these challenges. It's weighing on everybody. So this why now? Especially because of this post-COVID era. COVID wasn't just about COVID itself. We also had what I'll call a pandemic of challenging our mental health, because worldwide, we've all been gravely impacted by that. And so as coaches, we are doing a disservice if we miss the cues, if we miss key elements in mental health that would in their mental wellness, if there's a breakdown anywhere, because we're in a position to help, to fill the gap, to create awareness around things that people may not even see with themselves. So, I mean, there's so many reasons why this is such an important topic right now, and coaches really can't afford to shy away from this topic because of the grave nature of how everybody has been impacted by this.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Pam. And I'm just noticing that, we at the outset, before we came on this panel, Susan asked, who do you think the coaches are going to be that join us and what are their specialties? And I'm just noticing, folks are saying hello from all over the world, but they're also all different kinds of coaches. So we've got leadership coaches, we've got wellness coaches, we've got, So the point being that I think this is something that's relevant for every kind of coach, positive psychology coaches, life coaches, transition coaches, people that do career coaching. A lot of the time people end up in a career transition space because of a mental health crisis that takes place in their personal lives or in their work life. So coaches wind up being at that intersection of life and work and thriving, whether we like it or not. And I think at the end of the day, we like it. Like, that's what we consider to be our passion. That's what that's why we selected this career, to become someone who can help empower others to thrive. And so having some level of knowledge, we're not trying to turn people into therapists. A lot of folks will ask that question. And maybe each of you can kind of address that distinction. But having a tool set, being armed with knowledge about some of these domains is really key to success. So I'd love to have you here, two quick things. First, audience, please take the time to put questions in the Q&A box, because we will switch to Q&A in the next few minutes, and I want to try to get to as many of those questions as we can. And then secondly, I'd love to have all of you on the panel just share if there's a personal experience you've had where this has been particularly relevant with a client, with a student, someone that a colleague, because bringing it close to home, I think, is important for all of us. Who wants to start?
Yeah,
Go for it.
Go ahead, Pam.
Okay, I was going to say, wait, I spoke last. I probably shouldn't, but
No, you should speak first.
One of the things early in my career that I didn't recognize, and again, this is probably because the topic of mental health was not one that was largely spoken about, among my family, among my community that I grew up in, all of that. It just wasn't at the forefront of conversations. So it was really easy for me to miss that what many of us who now understand symptoms of depression was depression. So early in my work career, I was young and married and knew, small children, working on my PhD. And I mean, every single symptom of depression was there, loud and clear. I was working in a toxic work environment in which it didn't matter even if I had said that I was feeling the way I was feeling, but it was physical manifestations from head to toe. I woke up in the morning in complete pain. I didn't know what that was. And one of the things that I've learned is depression can trigger dormant physical conditions. And so that there was quite a few of those. But I had to advocate for myself. I had to find my own voice, even though I didn't understand what was happening. So now as a coach, when I work with people, I make it a point to help them see and to help them discover within themselves whether or not they're getting to that breaking point, because a lot of people just are completely unaware of when that's the case. I'll tell a really quick story. A realtor that I had who was helping us buy our house, it was a very challenging situation. We were dealing with another realtor who was all pretty much abusive to all of us. The way he talked to us, it was just awful. She went through an extreme amount of stress going through that process with us to sell the house. When it finally closed, 4 months later, I hadn't heard from her. Come to find out, she was diagnosed with cancer and unfortunately passed away. She had no idea she had cancer because she attributed all of the symptoms that she was having to the stress of this person that we were dealing with the real estate. She had no idea that her body was telling her that something is wrong beyond this situation. And so that was such a devastating tragedy that it has been my mission really to help people recognize when they are on the brink or before they get to that point. And so I'll stop there, but that's sort of been my personal experience with this.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it just cuts directly to the bone in terms of us all having some connection to this topic at some point, whether it's personal or in our family or in our colleagues. Susan, your experience?
Yeah, I can give personal experience, and then I can give client experience as well. So one of the things that I talk about in my TED Talk is the experience that I had as a young child dealing with the death of my father. I was 15 and he was 42, and he had terminal cancer. And I describe very much this experience of losing this person who was the most important person in my life, and going to school because my mother was trying to keep things normal for us, and putting on a face of, it's okay, I'm okay. I was praised for being strong. I was praised for keeping things going. Whereas in truth, I was struggling. I was unable to bear the weight of my grief. And as a 15-year-old, for me, that took the form of binging and purging and of depression. And the reason that I raise this is because it's been remarkable to me that even in the shadow of illness and death that we have all been through collectively, how there's still been so much of the narrative that I experienced as a 15-year-old, the narrative of, it doesn't matter how much you're dying inside, it doesn't matter how much you're crumbling, put on the smile, you praised for being strong, you become the master of being okay. This view is pervasive in our organizations. During COVID, everywhere you looked, people would be talking about silver linings. The idea that we've just got to find the silver lining. There was constantly the idea that, if you didn't use your time in quarantine to dust off your screenplay or to perfect sourdough bread baking, that there was something wrong with you. And so, and don't get me wrong, if you use your time in quarantine to dust up your knowledge of 20th century Scandinavian cinema, all power to you. But it seems like we live in a world that has, at some level, when it comes to the essence of our humanity, our emotions and our thoughts, invited us into a place of unseeing ourselves, of unseeing others. And if we look at even our management structures in organizations, there's so much that is bound around goals and feedback and KPIs and all of these things that are about what can be predicted and what feels that it's logical. And yet all of us who've spent a moment in life knows that when things go wrong, when things don't work according to plan, it's often because of this messy, difficult human stuff inside of us. And so how this relates to coaching is I've so often in my work come face to face with coaches who say things like, well, if we discuss emotional difficulties, then that is doing therapy, and we don't want to be doing therapy because that's against our remit. And so there's a lot of discomfort with coaches about how do we go to emotions in ways that are effective and helpful and supportive. And this becomes really, you ask for personal examples. I'll give you 3 quick examples of how issues around emotional health and well-being show up in our everyday experiences in coaching. The first is a very common symptom of depression and anxiety and many other mental health issues is sleeplessness. Now, if you are dealing with a client who on the one hand is in a new role, struggling with the career transition, trying to make health and wellness goals, but they are not sleeping, and you are as a coach not recognizing that sleeplessness actually may be signifying something more, then it becomes almost impossible to achieve the kind of outcomes with that person that you are trying to. So that's one example. Another example is that leaders, and anyone can lead as we know, but leaders are more and more asked to deal with these kinds of issues in the workplace and to really be able to connect with people in a way that people experience as authentic and caring and real. And if the leader that you are working with struggles with emotional literacy, is not able to reflect on their own emotions, they are not going to be able to reflect on the emotions of the team and of people who are struggling in change. So that's a second. A third quick way that this shows up in coaching is we know that right now around 1 in 2 people are describing themselves as feeling completely burnt out, that they just have nothing left to give. And a core sign of burnout is an increase in feelings of cynicism and feeling just, what's the point in continuing? Now, if you're working with a leader who's dealing with any kind of issue around workplace culture, workplace engagement, as an example, and start saying, oh, well, people are cynical, we can try to fix that by engagement strategies, or we can actually recognize that what is going on for people is they are completely burned out. So these are 3 examples. I give them as leadership examples, but they traverse every aspect of our coaching, careers, goal setting, health and wellness, life coaching and beyond.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, I'm so glad that you spoke of it across that spectrum. And then that's why I'm also really glad there's coaches from so many different domains here today, because it's really not a leadership issue. It's really not a health and wellness issue. It is a human issue. So coaches in every single domain need to include this tool set and this knowledge into their approach to their clients for all the reasons you mentioned. Shelley, can you share with us your personal experience with some of this? I mean, you're really, of all of us, probably the most deeply knowledgeable. And maybe you would share a little bit about some of the domains that people will learn about in the course.
Right. So the first thing I'd like to do is just emphasize what Susan and Pamela have already said. One of the things that I think is really important for coaches is you simply are in a position to observe and notice when people are exhibiting symptoms. And I'll give a real quick example here. Is an emergency department doctor that I worked with that was a client of mine, and she worked in an emergency room. She had 3 children at home. She had a dog that refused to get house trained, so it was constantly messing all over the house. And little by little, she said that every once in a while she just burst into tears, and she didn't have any idea why, because as she said, I have it all. I've got a beautiful family, I've got a beautiful home, I've got a wonderful job. There's no reason for me to be upset. Yet she burst into tears. And I noticed from working with her that she was losing weight. She told me she wasn't sleeping, and she was also taking responsibility for things at the hospital she worked at that had absolutely nothing to do with her. This is what we would call excessive guilt. So as a person who is working with her on a regular basis, I was able to see, hey, she is exhibiting the signs of depression. She slipped into this state, so she wasn't aware of it herself. And a person who is observing you, who isn't aware of symptoms, may not notice it as well. We may think, like Susan said, oh, she's just burned out, she's overstressed, she needs to maybe step back a little bit. But in fact, what the person was suffering from, what this woman was suffering from, was clinical depression. And so we were able to refer her and get her the help she needed. And then once you are on an even keel as far as mental health goes, then you're so much better able to solve the problems that come up in your life and to work toward your coaching goals. But if that underlying mental health issue is there and nobody's recognizing it, it's going to get worse, and it's really going to impact all of the things that you try to do in your life. So I think that's very important for all of us who are in helping fields to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health. One of the things that I think is very interesting is post-COVID, or in the middle of COVID, the CDC did a survey on how people were doing. And of course, there were enormous increases in depression, anxiety, trauma and stress-related symptoms, and an increase in substance abuse. So those 4 things, depression, anxiety disorders, stress and trauma disorders, and substance abuse, are things that I really think that it's important for us to understand a little bit more about. And those are some of the things that we will actually be focusing on in the course that we've prepared for you. Some of the signs that you might be looking for in particular are when people start withdrawing or avoiding social situations, that's a really big sign, and it could be indicative of several different conditions. It's important to notice when people are exhibiting direct signs of anxiousness and nervousness, or heaven forbid, inebriation. And it's important for us to really notice whenever anybody's behavior or speech patterns or just the things they say are starting to deviate from their personal norm. So whenever you start seeing these changes in people, even sometimes when they're for the better, for instance, one of the things that I do in my work also is I counsel students at Harvard. And I had a student that came to me this was several years ago, in the beginning part of October, which was just a month after classes had started. And she said, I've got great news. I've got all my term papers for the term done. I'm starting a big research project. I'm working in a research lab. And I talked the registrar into letting me register for 2 additional courses. Now, Harvard students ordinarily take 4 courses, and that's a heavy load. This student had signed up for 6 of them. So she was doing well. She was feeling good. She was feeling really self-confident, and she was productive. But if you didn't know that these were signs of hypomania, which could eventually progress into a full-blown manic episode, then you would just think, oh, this person's doing really well. But we want everybody to understand what some of these signs are so that you can help your clients from kind of falling off the edge totally, and be able to refer them to mental health professionals.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Shelley. I think that it's really crucial that we understand that what we're trying to do in developing and sharing the material in this course, with much of which you have been responsible for helping us create and craft, is not to turn our coaches into therapists, but to really make them knowledgeable about what to look for. What are the signs? What are the possibilities that may be hidden that, as you said, someone can look like super overachieving, or they're, Susan mentioned not sleeping, and we might see something like that as just a slight issue. Like, maybe we would ask them to do some kind of sleep practice or something, but it could be the surface of something much more serious, and not to automatically go there, but to be aware. I think that is the most important thing. I'd love to switch into questions because we get so many coming in that we will barely be able to scratch the surface, but let's jump in. And I think, just along the same lines of what Shelley was speaking to, probably the key question that a lot of folks are asking is very well articulated here by Tiffany. So she says, I am not a licensed medical professional or a therapist, and I do not want to cross the line into this territory. I want to remain ethical to the coaching profession in its truest form by being a thinking partner facilitator for my clients. How do I navigate that challenge?
I can respond a little bit to this.
Okay, great.
I think firstly, what Shelley described is really crucial, which is it's very important in any profession to know what's in our remit and what's not in our remit.
Right.
And to be able to, when someone is struggling with something that you recognize is not in your remit, to be able to get them the help that they need, or at least have the conversation, or be able to refer them. And without the knowledge of what the common signs and symptoms are, it becomes impossible to actually have that conversation. So I think that there are 2 levels of this. The first is about the recognition, so that one is able to refer versus not. And then I think a second part of this is that a lot of the work that coaches do that is in their remit So this is work around values. This is work on relationships. This might be work on self-compassion, all of these kind of things, values, purpose, all of these kinds of conversations that we have as coaches are supportive of emotional health and wellness. So there is this line that is a very important line. And I think that one of the reasons that the work that we're doing and the discussion that we're having is so crucial is because it helps that when someone is moving to a stage where mental health issues are directly affecting their capacity to move through life effectively, that is very often the time where we want to be having that conversation.
Mhm. Well, I would just, oh, go ahead, Pamela.
Well, I just wanted to quickly add, Dr. Melissa Hankins in the comments, I think just really summarized what Susan said really well. As I always say, the more knowledge you have about mental health, the less harm you are likely to do. And I've been engaging in a lot of these conversations over the last 2 years, whether we're talking about trauma, stress, burnout, depression, and there always is a reluctance from coaches in terms of even breaching this realm. And I really want to urge us as professionals to not be afraid of this realm, to not be afraid to learn about this stuff, because the more you learn about it, as Susan just said, the more you know about this line. So yes, of course, there is a risk of crossing over, but you are more likely to cause harm if you do not understand what that line is, or if you don't understand how to recognize the signs, what Shelley pointed out about being super motivated and getting all the things done from a coaching standpoint can look like, wow, you've achieved all your goals. But if you're that coach who doesn't understand what hyper behavior looks like, then that'll get missed by you and your client. So I'll just say what Melissa said again, the more you know about mental health, the less harm you are likely to do.
And I will add to that, that the more likely, and we will talk about this extensively in the course, the more likely you'll understand what to do when it shows up in terms of resource, referrals, tools, opportunities to help your client find the support they need. So Shelley, you were going to
Right.
add
Well,
something.
I was just going to say that traditionally we think about the two different realms of helping people. We think about therapists as working with people who are below normal in their thought, behavior, and emotional state, and helping them to achieve normalcy or get into the normal range. Whereas coaches work with people in the normal range and help them to excel or get up to that flourishing peak performance part of their lives. And because you know about the underlying part doesn't mean that you can't help people to achieve peak performance in their life, but you can't really achieve peak performance if you're not emotionally and mentally well. So that's going to undermine all of your coaching efforts, all of your coaching goals, if somebody has an underlying mental disorder and you're not picking up on it. And once you do pick up on it, you're not in that much danger, I don't believe, of acting as the therapist. If you simply remember that when you see these things that you are going to refer.
And also have some knowledge that this course will impart to you around what does that referral process look like? Because I think one of the most challenging aspects for coaches is there's a recognition moment, if you're knowledgeable of the domains like anxiety or addiction or depression or some of the things where you will learn in the course, but then the recognition moment leads to the question, what do I do as a coach? And so it's having some knowledge about what are the resources available? How do I support my client in finding, accessing, and discussing what are the appropriate resources? Because as Shelley,
how do you even breach the topic with them? because there still is, unfortunately, a lot of stigma surrounding mental health issues. And especially those of you who may work with military members, and there's still stigma. And people are worried that they won't be able to advance in their careers if they have been diagnosed with something. So how do you even breach the topic with them? And that's one of the things that we talk about in the course as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, yesterday I had Natasha Bowman, and I encourage everyone to look at this LinkedIn Live that I did with her. She's a lawyer and also recovering from bipolar disorder herself. And she's super open and transparent and just incredibly thoughtful about the subject. And she spoke directly about working with HR executives and the role that the coach can play. So this is crucial, this access conversation. In fact, a couple of really good questions came in that kind of touch on this. Shelley and Elise are both asking a question around what can coaches do in terms of the conversation starter or questions that are good for getting access to these themes. I think since all of you are coaches, maybe that would be a good place, like, because I think some of us, we may want to get knowledgeable, but then we still may be uncomfortable because of the taboo, as you mentioned, Shelley, and because we haven't done this necessarily before. So what would be some of the questions as a coach you would use to access this conversation with your client?
One of the questions that I ask in sort of an introductory part of the session, I will say, so how are you doing? I want your politically correct answer and I want your real answer so that they understand that there's a difference between I'm fine, I'm good, and this was a hard day. And to let them know that they have permission to say that this is a hard day or this is a hard week or, I need help. So making it a safe space to have those conversations. So that's one that just comes to mind right away.
Great suggestion. Can you say that again, just for everyone?
Yeah.
Really
so
great.
Asking, how are you doing? I want, and pausing and saying, and now I want your politically correct answer. And I also want your real answer. And that way they can hear both answers and they're more conscious of what they're saying. Am I smiling just because I think I'm supposed to smile? Am I saying I'm good just because I think that's what I'm supposed to say versus no, but here's what's really going on inside of me.
Beautiful.
There's
Susan? Oh, Shelley, go ahead.
There's one other question that I might suggest that people may interject, is to tell a client, honestly, oh, I've noticed a couple of changes since we've been working together. And then you can list them, whatever changes you've noticed, and say, I know we were going to talk about X today, but I think it's important that we talk about these issues as well. So can you tell me a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, that's a really great example. I had a recent client who was a physician who I met in person. And in person, he came across as very high achieving, as they often do, physicians, and wanting to be very goal directed in terms of his team and client, patient service and all of that. And then about 4 months later, I was with three months later, I was noticing that he was not showing up for his sessions, or he would cut them off, or he would tell me that he was just having a really long night. And so that same kind of thing, like I was picking up signals that this is not the same energy I was seeing 3 months ago. And so I stopped our general process to check in on and shared with him, I noticed a change over the last 3 months. Could you describe for me what's really going on for you? And I used a question kind of similar to what Pam was saying. So that's another thing, is just watching over time that your coaching or coachee may exhibit changes and you have an opportunity to point them out. Susan?
Yeah, I think what's been said already is really helpful. One thing that I would add is that a lot of times when people are experiencing mental health issues, they manifest physically. And so this is really changes in sleep, changes in eating, changes in, there's a direct association between what we put in our bodies very often and how we then exhibit particular experiences. So for example, when I was working clinically, I would always be asking people, how many cups of coffee do you drink? Because someone who's super anxious about give a presentation, that 10 cups of coffee is either actually exacerbating their experience of anxiety, or actually people can be using alcohol and so on to self-medicate. So when you've got a client who's saying, you know, when I get home from work, I just don't want to do anything. I pour myself 5 glasses of wine and I sit and watch Netflix, you know, on the surface, that might look like the person's just decompressing, but it actually may be a sign of self-medicating. So obviously it's going to depend on the domain that the person's working in, but in health and wellness coaching, asking things like, you know, about coffee intake, about alcohol, like these are often part of the kind of coaching conversation that is part of the psychological contract that the person would expect, and so would be appropriate. In a leadership or organizational context, asking about, well, you know, you said you were up 3 nights this week during the presentation. You know, have you been having issues with sleep, or what is going on? And often our clients are going to be sharing that. But I think the important thing becomes as coaches to, you know, again, this beautiful example that Pamela gave earlier, which is if you can't recognize it, you can't recognize it. A blind spot is by definition a blind spot. And so it's only when we become versed in the relationships between people's physical, emotional health, and then their goal attainment and their life outcomes that we're able to be of service to them.
Well said. Yes, absolutely true. We're having so many questions. I'm not even sure
Put my glasses on.
where to begin. I want to give each of you an opportunity to have a couple of minutes for final thoughts. But there is a theme that's been coming up in a lot of the Q&A, and maybe one of you or all of you can quickly comment on it, which is a little bit about the referral process to a therapist, or if you have a client who is already working with a therapist. So I think it's kind of asking, there are variations of this question in the Q&A box, but as coaches, what do you recommend in terms of working with a client who may need or would benefit from working with a therapist, or if they already are working with a therapist? How do you see the relationship between coaches and therapists?
Do you want to take this, Shelley?
Well, sure. There's 2 things that I would recommend that coaches do. Well, the first thing I would recommend is that wherever your clients are, I know a lot of us are working over the internet now with clients, so they're not even in our general vicinity. But if you're working with clients face to face in a particular locale, I would develop a list of people to refer to that you know are trustworthy and that you have confidence in. So I would find an expert in depression. I would find an expert in eating disorders. And, you know, you can ask your colleagues, you can ask at various meetings who people would recommend, and get a list of these people, a list of psychologists or psychiatrists or clinics to refer people to, and then actually make contact with them and tell them that you're a coach and that occasionally you have people that need their services, and would they mind if you referred to them, or would they be willing to accept referrals? So then you'll at least know if they're accepting new clients as well. So you have your list to begin with. Then when you're actually talking to your clients and they open up to you about a problem that you're having, you can say something like, I know somebody who would really be able to help you with this. Would you be willing to contact them, or I'll actually contact them for you in your presence and see if we can set up an appointment. So that's one thing you can do. And then secondly, if a person is already working with a therapist, one of the things you can do is ask them to tell them to ask their therapist tell them that they're working with a coach and see if it's okay if the coach and the therapist are able to work together as a team. Some therapists don't want that. They don't want the coaches interfering in their work. They want you to wait until after the therapy is completed. Others are going to be wide open to, yes, let's work together to help this individual succeed.
Absolutely. There's no question that there's a lot of variation, because in my practice, I've had a couple of examples of both, where the psychiatrist that my client was working with was actually very open. She said to me, your client is great looking at his childhood issues and what led to his depression. And we were working on that over the last few years to get him off medication. And I'm so glad he's working with a coach, because you can talk to him about the future. We don't talk about, in her conversations with the client, she wasn't really getting into his goals and his aspirations. And so it actually wound up being a wonderful resource to have all of us involved. But again, each case is a unique situation. So it's becoming aware of who is available and how you can help your client access. Comments, Pam or Sue, around these kinds of questions?
Well, so I've been keeping my eye on the comments, and I have to acknowledge Valley Murphy's recommendation as Director of Education. It is noted, she says, how coaches and therapists can partner together would be a great webinar by itself. So
we'll work on that. Okay.
Yeah, I would sorry, I would just add that in addition to developing these good relationships with coaches in your area, there are also really excellent online lists of coaches that you can access that focus on different things. So whether it's different specialities, Psychology Today has one, NAMI has one, there are a range of them that you could find easily online, and that will both help you to understand what it is that a particular psychologist is focusing on, or a psychiatrist is focusing on, in terms of depression versus anxiety as an example, but also what kind of modality they tend to work from in a way that feels like it could be helpful to the client. Because there are definitely, you know, in my experience working with clients, there's some clients who are very, very goal directed, they like structure, and some type of therapeutic modalities might be more effective for that, relative to someone who is really wanting to go extremely deep and connect with some of the issues that they've experienced in more of a long-term way. And so these kind of online resources, a lot of them are really, really good. The other thing I would just encourage is, I think one of the barriers sometimes with clients in actually seeking help is they can have an interaction with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and that first interaction might not go well. Or the person might say, well, I tried therapy 5 years ago and I didn't like it. You know, I had a bad initial interaction. And I think it's a really, really important conversation, if you're having this with a client, to actually normalize that you sometimes aren't going to like the first therapist that you work with, and that it's actually okay to, in the same way as you explore other areas of your life, it's actually okay to have 2 or 3 conversations with potential therapists so that you can find someone who feels like a good fit for you. And I think when you have this conversation and you normalize the experience, that it's not just like a one-off done deal, make it or break it, it can help to just loosen up the sense of fear that often people can have in relation to having this experience for the first time therapeutically.
Beautifully said. Yes, I think that it's also a wonderful analogy when you have a client who is potentially fearful, which many are, or resistant, to remind them that, you know, you're very fortunate that we got to work together with me as a coach, for example. You may have had 2 or 3 coaches that you spoke with. Every coach is also an individual. And so it's also a match in the coaching space. It's also a match in the therapy space. It's human to human. So as you said, that can loosen and lighten what can be kind of a scary access route to saying, oh, I need a support professional. And, you know, that can be intimidating for a lot of people. So if we can loosen that, that's great. So we're going to run out of time, unfortunately, and I just want to share with everyone that we will keep the chat, which has been super lively, and I haven't even been able to keep up with it. So thank you for doing that, Pam. But we'll keep your questions, and there will be an opportunity to follow up. We'll keep them. We'll share them with the panelists. And also, if you take advantage of this course, that's going to be available on the 15th of November through our website. Just go to our website. It's right on the front page. You can learn all the details. Shelley has agreed to do a live discussion within a few weeks after the course launches. So there'll be another opportunity to have live conversations with Dr. Carson about the material in the course, where some of these questions that we didn't get to today, we can take a deeper dive. And I had the thought, based on all of your feedback today and the questions, that one thing we may do at the Institute is put together a list of coaches that we have as members that are also practicing psychologists, because we have quite a few and they are available to us. So I will think about the best way. I know I'm already making that work for my team, but I will think about how we could put together a resource of coaches that are members of the Institute or fellows of the Institute that are practicing psychologists or have been, like myself, in the past. So stay tuned. We'll see if we can't make that available. So before we say goodbye, I just want to thank you all. This has been super. We could have spent 3 hours easily. Everyone is engaged and I think recognizes just how important this topic is. But I just want to give each one of you a chance to give us a final thought. Susan?
My final thought is that emotions are often sidelined. And even in coaching, coaches will often think that emotions, when you go to emotions, you're somehow doing therapy and you're crossing the line. And I think it just becomes really important to recognize that we are in the age of the heart. You know, we've moved from the age of the physical, we've moved from the age of the knowledge worker, we are in the age of the heart. And to be effective coaches, we need to develop this deep knowledge and set of skills that help us to understand the hearts of our clients and to refer and serve them. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for that. It's beautiful. And it's so much aligned with the core of why we at the Institute of Coaching wanted to create this course. So thank you, Susan, for being so inspirational. You know, you're part of the reason that I'm here. So I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you.
Pam? You're on mute.
I'm on mute. I'll just say quickly.
That's the universe saying to be quick.
Just be quick to just not be afraid of this subject matter. It is scary because we have our own places that we don't want to go personally, let alone helping somebody walk through that. But I encourage you to not be afraid of this subject matter and to dive all the way in so that we can be as effective as possible for our clients.
Beautifully said. Absolutely. You're armed with knowledge is what we're trying to accomplish, not turning you into a psychotherapist, but armed with knowledge. So, Shelley.
Well, the one thing I would like to point out is that we talk about mental illness and as either you have it or you don't, but I'd like to remind everybody that most of the symptoms of mental illness exist on a continuum. And you may have clients that aren't clinically depressed or they aren't clinically anxious, but they may still be suffering and not functioning at their very highest level. Right. And so by by understanding mental health symptoms, it will increase your compassion toward your clients who seem stuck or unable to move forward. And it'll also enhance your ability to coach your clients toward greater success and fulfillment. And I'd really like to thank all of you for spending time with us today to examine this really important topic.
Thank you, Shelley. You've really been key in making this possible. And I love what you said about the distinction around mental illness. Our course and our focus is around creating a world and workplaces of mental health. And that's what we're here to do. And I think that's where we can really make a difference as coaches. So thank you all for joining us today. Please go to the Institute of Coaching website and sign up for the course and get your discount. And we'll look forward to seeing you in December, hopefully with Shelley on a live discussion. This is just the beginning. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.